Hey everyone, welcome to Sedara's Cybersecurity Whiteboard sessions. My name is Derek. Thanks for joining us. Today's topic, we're going to talk a little bit about operationalizing NIST compliance activities. Really what this is about is for organizations that are either trying to develop and mature their overall security posture inside their environment, or have to align with the compliance framework for very specific compliance or other governance needs. Regardless of why you're choosing to go this route and do these sorts of things, I hope this is a helpful couple tips to help you get started and kind of give you a different way to think about using these compliance frameworks in your day-to-day operational activities. So one of the things that, one of the challenges that we typically see a lot of organizations running into is just getting started. Typically, what most of these frameworks do is talk about asset management as one of their main components. So a lot of organizations think you have to have a really rock-solid asset management system in place first before we can really do anything. And that's really not necessarily the case. So that's kind of what we'll talk a little bit about today is how to kind of approach some of these things without really having to bite off too much at once. Let's talk a little bit about the frameworks themselves. So here at Sedara, we do almost all of our cybersecurity programs are based off of some sort of compliance framework. We like the NIST series, seems to be really comprehensive and is very, very popular these days. We do almost everything off NIST CSF 1.1, which is what you see behind me on the board today. We've also, over the years, used 800-53, which has been around for a very long time in the government and classified environments, 800-171, also very, very involved and comprehensive and similar. And then you get outside of NIST, right? You have your ISO 27001 with the international standards, and a lot of these are very, very similar concepts. It's just a different way to organize and approach some of these. And then you have your CIS controls and a handful of other ones. So regardless of which one you decide to use and which one you think is the best fit for your organization, they almost all start with the asset management concept. And again, you don't have to have a extremely robust asset management program to make good use out of the framework. And that's what we'll kind of dive into a little bit, is how to get started, how to bite off a small piece at a time. And by that, what I mean is start with the assets that you already know exist, right? You're already going to be familiar with them. Typically, those are going to be high impact systems, low volume, ones that you already touch on a regular basis, and then you look at different elements of the framework to apply different pieces of that to it. One example is firewalls, is a perfect example. Typically in organizations that are, we'll say middle enterprise, right? Less than 1,000 users. Even if you're talking 5, 10 locations and a couple thousand users, usually you still know how many firewalls you have, where they are, and what their purpose is, right? Are they full UTMs? Are they doing content filtering? Are they doing spam filtering, or is it just more of a traditional standard firewall with IDS, IPS? Regardless, they're typically low volume and very important, clearly. So if you start with the entire process and this concept and just apply it to one aspect, that's one way where you can really start to look at different components and think about how these different aspects of a compliance framework apply to just one small segment of your organization. Then you can really start to apply it to other ones, right? Then you go to directory services, and then you go to full workstation management and apply different concepts. Because the reality is that each one of these is a bit different depending on the technology you're talking about and the user base that you're talking about within the organization. Starting with firewalls, let's just talk through a simple example. And this is, you could do this. This will be a little bit different for every organization, but the way to think about it is you look at each one of these, and it becomes a lot easier to look at these and think about what is important for this relative to the scope, right? Relative to firewall. So asset management, right? We're not talking about inventorying your entire organization. We're talking about how many firewalls do you have? Usually that's a short list, right? If you can count them on one hand, put them on a spreadsheet, however you want to do it, that's an easy thing, right? So you're already into the next stage. So asset management is an easy one to bite off on your low volume, high impact assets. Second one is governance. Governance, as I mentioned, this concept will be very, very different depending on the technology you're talking about. When you talk about firewalls, what's important for governance? Well, we want to know how we manage them, right? Do we have that written down? If not, that's a perfect place to start. Don't overcomplicate this. Let's document who manages them, how often they do things to them, what they're allowed to do, and what the approval processes need to be, right? So you're talking about change management, you're talking about updates processes, you're talking about configuration management, and building a check and balance system in, right? This applies to things, for example, if you put a new firewall rule in to allow access that's required for the business, who can make that change, who needs to approve that change, and is there another level in there to make sure that the changes that were put in are indeed valid and are indeed applicable to the business. So those are the sorts of things you can start to think about in a very simple way if you only focus on a particular type of asset at a time. Access control. Another really big one, and I'm jumping around a little bit here, but you kind of get the point. Access control is another big one. Who can log into the firewalls? What access do they have? Are they regular admin, super admins? Are they read-only administrators? Are they report admins? Can they log in and just pull reports for user bases? And then what can they do with that data? Another aspect of this is monitoring your access. If you're not already doing that today, a very important factor is when somebody logs in, and especially if they make a change, do you already know about it? Are you sending those notifications to yourself right from the firewall? Do they go to a team of people? Are you sending them to logs to a SIM, and then you have behavioral rules built around it, which is a great way to think about this. You know, if a firewall change happens at 2 in the morning, are you going to know about it? That means somebody logged in and intentionally made a change. If that's not common practice for your organization, that's a problem, right? So those are the sorts of things you can start to think about when you look at each one of these areas and really apply them much more specifically to a smaller set of assets. Maintenance is another perfect one, right? Very tied to governance. Governance is you know, whose responsibility is it? How are they going to do it? When are they going to do it? But simple maintenance is, you know, who's checking the release versions when new ones come out? Who's going through the release notes, seeing if they're applicable, seeing if there's vulnerabilities that are going to be patched in that current release, and seeing if there's issues. When do you install it? How often? What's the policy there? So another very, very simple one that is typically already defined. You're typically already doing these sorts of things. So this is an easy way to think about what you did, how you do it, write it on paper, and look at the way the control references these, and see if you need to make some maybe better definitions in your policies, maybe create a recurring ticket system once a month. Somebody automatically gets a ticket assigned to them to go see if there's an update on the firewalls and read through the release notes and document if there's any changes, right? Things as simple as that make it very, very easy to approach an entire framework when you're only looking at small segments of it. Then you have the detect and respond. So I'll start the entire thing. This is where we live day to day here at Sedara for the most part when you're talking about managed detection and response and actually monitoring for threats and preventing them or stopping them and then preventing them from happening again. So this is a cyclical thing, right? We detect issues, we investigate them, we run them to ground with the response capabilities. Either that means we're blocking, in a firewall, that means we're blocking IP addresses. If it's a UTM doing content filtering, you're blocking URIs, you're adding those to the block lists. If you're using intelligence subscriptions that apply across your organization, which is a great way to do these sorts of things, you know, you put them at a global level and then they apply to your firewalls and your content filters, maybe your spam filters and some other technologies if you're bringing all of that intelligence together. But the idea is you can look at, you know, how do you detect with your firewalls? How do you respond with your firewalls? And write it down and create a plan around it. Again, it's a very, very, it's much more approachable when you limit your scope to this. And you look at the entire framework, it can be very, very overwhelming. But again, limiting your approach here can make it much more attainable. And then recovery. You know, that's there's a lot of very operational components here that you have to think about. How are you doing backups? Do you configuration backups, right? If you have a hardware die, if you have a firewall go offline, first of all, do you know about it before it becomes an issue? Do you know it was about to go down? Are you doing monitoring, right? That comes down to some of the maintenance and the operational components of it. And if you replace it, who's responsible for actually getting it back online and doing it, right? These are the sorts of things you can start to think about there as you run through the framework here. So as you can see, if you break it down into smaller asset categories and chunks, right? Look at the low volume, high impact assets. You can very quickly run through the entire model, see where, get a clear understanding of where you actually are in the entire framework relative to that asset group, and then you can start to operationalize some of these things very, very quickly. Again, in most of these scenarios, you're really not changing a whole lot, or this is a good opportunity to identify if there's changes needed. It's a good way to kind of focus it and document those things. And then once you're comfortable with this process, then you move on to other areas, right? Go to directory services and focus on your domain controllers, right? That's another perfect example of typically low volume, high impact, high value data sources or assets that all this are very, very applicable to. Now that one can get a little bit more granular when you talk about all the things that directory services do, but typically everyone knows where their domain controllers are, right? Or LDAP servers, however you're doing your authentication management. But the point is, now you're still only talking about a limited set of systems with a very narrow focus of what they actually are intended to do, and again, you can run through the entire framework. So you can see how it makes it much more approachable to do this through daily operations rather than biting off an entire project. And that's kind of the intention of this thought process. You know, once you've done this for a handful of different systems, that's where you can maybe take a step back and look at a much larger program, bring it all together, and that's where auditors and compliance management folks can be very, very helpful at bringing a whole program together, and then possibly looking at external tools to actually start to manage the entire framework and gather your artifacts and really build a whole program around it. But starting small and working your way through on some of these assets is a great way to get started, and I hope this was helpful.